Like any typical Tuesday morning, I was sitting at my desk going over financial portfolios when an unknown number appeared on my phone. Spam calls are so common these days that I usually leave them on voicemail, but for some reason I answered. It may have been instinct, or it might have been pure luck. In any case, the call would completely upend my well-planned world. Hello! Still looking at the statistics on my computer, I responded. Except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant clicks of keyboards, the office was silent around me. Harper T. My gut nodded because the voice on the other line seemed cautious and familiar. It's your mother. I froze my fingers on the keyboard. 12 years. I hadn't spoken to my mother, father, or sister Lily in 12 years, and I hadn't heard that voice either. I spent 12 years creating my own success in life, free from their poisonous partiality. I was relieved that my office door was closed when I looked at it. What you want? Perhaps it was precisely how I wanted my voice to sound. But it came out louder than I had planned. On my desk, my free hand balled into a fist. A pause and a big sigh were heard. Harper, your father is seriously ill. According to the physicians, he doesn't have much time left. Her voice broke a little. We want you to come home, to make peace, to say goodbye. Sitting there, I gazed at the modern artwork that was hung on the wall of my office. I had purchased it for myself last year just because I could. The quiet between us was like a rubber band that was about to break. Life continued as usual outside my window, cars moving, people strolling, the globe spinning. But in my office, time appeared to stop. Before she could reply, I eventually responded, I'll think about it, and disconnected up. She could, of course, try to manipulate me, guilt me, or do anything else she had in mind. I sat there for a while, my coffee getting cold next to me. Memories that I had tried so hard to suppress, but that came back like a dam breaking, and I found myself recalling everything that had happened before this point. Every slight, every betrayal, every instance of Lily being chosen over me. I was always the one in charge and the one on my own. I must have been. It was Auguste who was the favorite from the moment Lily was born, only 2 years after me. The routine was the same for every birthday, Christmas, and day in the week. Lily received the larger serving of dessert, the new toys, and the nicer clothes. I received the practical presents, the hand-me-downs, and the lectures about setting an example and being a big sister. Mom forced me to give up my new colored pencils when Lily requested them in 3rd grade. She would reply, You know how sensitive your sister is, while Lily grinned behind her back. Accidents happen, Dad replied after she threw her beloved book in the pool during a tantrum, and he gave her some ice cream to lift her spirits. I had read the book under my covers with a flashlight for hours after receiving it as a gift from my favorite instructor. Nobody purchased a substitute for me. They hosted celebrations when her grades improved. They would boast, Look how smart our little girl is, while I sat in the corner, earning consecutive while, which was to be expected. They just nodded and remarked, That's what we expect from you, Harper, when I received higher marks. Since you're older, you ought to lead by example. Early in life, I discovered that I had to obtain what I desired on my own. I began working at Joe's Cafe after school when I was 16. My own mother was never as much of a mentor to me as the manager, Sarah. She taught me how to be responsible, save money, and advocate for myself. With the hope of one day creating my own life, I saved every cent. What truly made me realize how pervasive the partiality was the phone incident. I had saved for months to purchase a simple smartphone for $100, which I had earned 1 tip at a time. Lily had a tantrum the day I brought it home. She screamed, But I want one too, and grabbed for my phone. Give it to me, Harper. You're really self-centered. I firmly answered no, while keeping it out of reach. I used my own funds to purchase this. You can also save money for one. Like me, you can acquire a job. Mom. Lily's face flushed as she yelled. Harper, being mean. They rushed naturally. Every time Lily called, they rushed over. Mom from the kitchen, Dad from his desk. both of them looking worried about their darling baby's suffering. "Harper," my dad stated sharply. I recognized the disappointment on his face. "What's causing your selfishness? All your sister wants to do is look at your phone." I said, "Because it's mine," my voice trembling with grief and rage. I earned it via hard effort. Every single dime was something I earned. My mother went on to say, "You're supposed to love your sister," with obvious displeasure. "How are you able to be so mean? This is not how we brought you up." I gave them a thorough examination, and then something made sense. This wasn't typical. This was unfair. It wasn't love. I was done acting like things was all right. This was something different. I said, "I do love her," without raising my voice. That doesn't mean I have to give her everything I own. Ignoring their calls and Lily's phony sobbing, which I knew would soon be replaced by requests for something else, I walked to my room and shut the door. Dreaming of getting away, I began looking at universities in different states that evening. I entered college applications at the top of a new document that I opened on my computer. It seems like yesterday when I recall the day the acceptance letter arrived. When I opened the package from the investment management program in Arizona, my hands were shaking, and I was 18 years old and fresh out of high school. Sarah, who understood how much this meant to me, kept an eye on me from behind the cafe counter. I said, "I got in," and then I said it louder. Sarah gave me a strong embrace. "I never doubted you for a second, kiddo." A half scholarship was provided in the letter, which was more than I had anticipated. I would require around $30,000 to pay for the remaining costs. There shouldn't have been any issues. Before Grandpa passed away, I was aware of the money he had left. He had explicitly said that it was for the education of both of his granddaughters. When he said to Mom and Dad, "Make sure both girls get their schooling," I was there. That's the purpose of this money. That day, I was full of hope as I drove home. Perhaps this would be the turning point. They could be pleased with me. Perhaps they would see me at last. I discovered them in the living room, with Mom and Dad watching TV, and Lily splayed out on the couch texting. With the letter in hand, I declared, "I got accepted. The Arizona Investment Management Program. I'm even receiving a partial scholarship from them." The TV was muted by Mom. Dad moved around in his seat. Lily never even raised her head from her phone. Mom remarked, "That's nice, honey," but I felt sick to my stomach because of the tone she used. "But Arizona is so far away." "The program is exactly what I want to do," I said, "and with Grandpa's money for the remaining tuition." "About that," Dad said, getting his throat cleared, "we don't have that money anymore." The globe appeared to slant to one side. "What do you mean?" I inquired. "Grandpa left that money specifically for our education, both of us." "Well," replied Mom, straightening her skirt, "we had to decide on a few things. Opportunities for investments appeared. And what about Lily's college fund?" Even though I knew the answer, I still asked. Their looks showed it to me. In fact, Dad laughed. "Don't stress over your sister's schooling. We'll take care of that." "So you spent my portion." I was raising my voice. "He spent the money Grandpa left for my education, but kept." "Lie. Stop being dramatic," Mom advised. "You're skilled at solving problems. You'll figure something out." I truly looked at them, at Lily's fashionable clothing and the newest iPhone, at Dad's new golf equipment in the corner, and at Mom's pricey jewelry. "You're telling me," I responded slowly, "that you bought toys with the money my grandpa left me for school? On yourselves?" "Watch your tone," Dad said. "No," I yelled. I refused to monitor my tone. "This is incorrect. This is just incorrect. Grandpa wanted us both to get that money." "Get out," Mom said sternly. "Just leave. Until you are able to address us with dignity." I slammed the door behind me as I ran out. Tears clouding my vision, I drove to the cafe and worked my shift in a haze. I worked my usual morning shift at the cafe the following day, making coffee and serving breakfast. I went through the motions while attempting to think of what to do next. Though she didn't press, Sarah sensed something wasn't right. I adored her because of this. My key wouldn't fit in the lock when I arrived home that afternoon. I kept trying, but it refused to turn. I saw my old suitcases from the basement sitting near the entrance at that point. My garments were crammed inside them. Some were folded carelessly, while others were simply pushed in. "Mom?" I knocked and yelled out. Mom said, "You're not welcome here anymore," as she entered the room. "We won't have that kind of disrespect in this house." "Are you serious?" What I was hearing was unbelievable. "You're kicking me out because I was upset that you stole my college money?" She said, "Don't be so dramatic. You are now 18, an adult. It's time to work things out for yourself." I tried not to cry as I stood there looking at their baggage. Neighbors who had known me my entire life drove by in their cars on our street, as if nothing had happened and my parents hadn't just thrown me out. "What about Lily? Would you never do this to her?" I questioned in a whisper. There was stillness, no response. With trembling hands, I took out my phone and dialed my mom's sister, Aunt Rachel. On the second ring, she answered. "What's wrong, Harper? You sound agitated." In between sobbing, I told her all I knew, including about being locked out, Grandpa's money, and my acceptance to college. Her words, "Stay right there," were forceful. "Your Uncle Mike and I are coming to get you." After 45 minutes, their vehicle arrived. Aunt Rachel gave me a strong hug as Uncle Mike packed my bags into the trunk. Whispering, "I'm so sorry, sweetie," she said. "This isn't right." Uncle Mike and Aunt Rachel arrived with a check that evening as they were seated in their guest room. The words, "We want to help with your college tuition," came from Aunt Rachel. "It's not everything, but it's what we can do." I said, "I'll pay you back, I promise," while crying. According to Uncle Mike, every penny. "We know you will, because unlike some people, we know exactly who you are and what you're capable of." I took a peek at the $30,000 check, enough to make up for the lack of the scholarship, sufficient to alter my life. The following 12 years seemed to fly by. A dream that I had created myself. College was exciting yet challenging. In order to pay for living expenses, I worked part-time at the university's financial office while I focused entirely on my academics. I made the dean's list each semester. I got outstanding internships every summer. I also set aside money each month to pay Uncle Mike and Aunt Rachel back. My phone never rang with calls from Lily or my parents throughout those 4 years. There were moments when I wondered what they were doing, but I would remind myself of the luggage on the threshold and make myself concentrate on my future. 2 months before to graduation, I received my first employment offer, a junior role with Goldman Investment Partners. The starting pay was higher than I could have ever imagined. I phoned Aunt Rachel on the day I signed the contract. "I did it," I said to her, my voice trembling with enthusiasm. "They want me to start right after graduation." She answered, "Of course they do," and her pride was evident in her tone. "Harper, you're extraordinary. You've always been." I started in a little studio apartment that hardly accommodated my desk and bed, but I didn't care since it was mine. I stayed in the same city as my employment. I would get up at 5 every morning, go to the gym, and get at my job by 7:30. I would stay up late every night to learn as much as I could from my coworkers. I was mentored by Catherine, my supervisor. "You've got something special," she said to me one evening when we were working on a significant case presentation. "You're not desperate, but you're hungry, motivated but not careless. More people like you are needed." After 3 years, I was promoted to senior analyst, investment manager. 2 years later, my pay increased by double and then quadruple. I relocated to a luxurious apartment with a view of the city and floor-to-ceiling windows after leaving my studio. When I spotted my first Mercedes, a beautiful black C-Class, in the parking garage, I couldn't help but smile. Aunt Rachel and Uncle Mike attempted to reject the money, but I paid them back in full. Aunt Rachel objected. "We didn't help you, so you pay us back." I said, "I know," to her. "You love me, which is why you helped me. However, I'm repaying you because I honor my word and because I also love you." I visited Paris, Tokyo, and Sydney, among other places. I shared images of snow-capped peaks in Switzerland and sunsets in Santorini on social media. I never looked at my family's social media pages, but I also never banned them. If they wanted to, let them witness my accomplishment. I had finished glancing back. 12 years later, everything came rushing back when I received that phone call at my workplace. I was traveling through my hometown's well-known streets the week following my mother's call. In some way, everything appeared smaller and less important. I adjusted my channel sunglasses in the rearview mirror as I drove up to my parents' house in my Mercedes. The home was almost unchanged, with the same wooden swing on the porch and blue shutters. However, I could clearly see the deteriorating gutters, the peeling paint, and the evidence of neglect. Before I could knock on the door, my mother opened it. She had aged more than I had anticipated, as shown by the gray streaks in her hair and the previously absent wrinkles around her mouth. She whispered, "Harper," and reached for an embrace that I didn't give back. You look so successful." "Where's Dad?" As I passed her and entered the home, I inquired. The scent of Dad's coffee in the living room and Mom's vanilla candles filled the entire house. Ahead of me, she hurriedly added, "He's having a good day today." My father's appearance caught me off guard. The guy who had appeared so powerful and commanding was slouched in his recliner, looking gaunt and white. But when he saw me, his eyes brightened, and I briefly had a glimpse of the father I knew. "Harper," he continued, his voice not as strong as I recalled, but it still had that authoritative note. "You came." I said, "I did," as I sat in the chair opposite him. "You look unwell." His laughter morphed into a cough. "Always direct, weren't you?" "Yes. The doctors say I have a few months, maybe fewer, to live because of cancer." Mom wrung her hands and hovered close. "I restored your former room for you. It is just how you left it." That nearly made me chuckle. Nothing was the same as when I left it. 12 years ago, they had ensured that. "Where's Lily?" Observing my sister's absence, I inquired. Mom answered, "Oh, she's out with friends," without any explanation. "She will return for supper. She can't wait to see you." Despite my doubts, I nodded. For a time, we engaged in awkward small conversation. They inquired about my car, housing, and employment. I saw them exchange glances when they thought I wasn't looking and responded with succinct, courteous responses. When Lily eventually appeared that evening, she was wearing brand new, high-end clothing. Even though she had put on a few pounds since I had last seen her, her face was still attractive and had that timeless sense of entitlement that I so vividly remembered. She exclaimed, "Harper," as though we were closest friends who had just spent a weekend apart. "Is it a Cartier watch, my God? It's quite beautiful." It was a peculiar dinner, as though food could heal a 12-year rift of silence and betrayal. Mom had prepared all of my favorite childhood meals. Dad typically pushed food about his plate while eating little. Lily talked constantly about her social life, her pals, and her intentions to launch a lifestyle blog. Dad abruptly added, speaking of plans, putting down his fork, "Harper, there's something important we need to discuss." Between our parents, I noticed Lily's eyes deepen and Mom become tense. I had an epiphany. It was more than simply said farewell to a dying parent. This was a very other matter. "What is it?" I requested, even though I knew in my heart that this would not go well. Dad's expression was stern as he leaned forward. "I need you to promise me something, a dying man's wish, if you will." My hand gripped my water glass tightly as I waited. "After I'm gone," he added, "I need to know that Lily will be covered and that she'll be able to continue living her life. And you, well, you have the ability to make sure that occurs." There was silence in the room. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears, the refrigerator humming, and the wall clock ticking away. "You want me to what?" My voice was dangerously quiet as I asked. "To take care of your sister." Mom rushed in. "To provide her financial support." "Harper, you're doing well. Additionally, you have more than enough." My chair scuffed the wooden floor when I got up from the dinner table. Let me clarify this. You asked me to provide financial assistance for my completely capable adult sister after we had not spoken for 12 years. Harper, please sit down, Mom begged. You're making this more dramatic than it needs to be. More dramatic? There was no comedy in my laughter. I was expelled from this house by you. My baggage and possessions were left on the porch by you. You've used my college funds, which Grandpa had set aside expressly for my education, and now you expect me to provide for Lily. It's unfair that you have so much money and won't share it. Lily said in a petulant voice. You've been self-centered all your life. I turned to look at her, really look at her, pricey jewelry, a designer outfit, and immaculately manicured nails, all of which our parents had paid for even at the age of 28. What exactly have you been doing these past 12 years, Lily? I inquired. While I was working 60-hour weeks, building my career, what were you doing? Responding defensively. I've been finding myself, she said. Not all of us want to be corporate slaves. Finding yourself on Mom and Dad's dime. I gave a headshake. And now that Dad's sick, you're worried about losing your meal ticket, aren't you? Don't talk to your sister that way. Mom lost her temper. She's sensitive. She needs to grow up, I yelled. She must figure out how to make ends meet. She must cease relying on other people to support her way of life. Dad's fist struck the table, although not as hard as I remembered from my early years. Enough. Harper, I'm dying. Knowing that my youngest daughter will be cared for is my final desire. And what about your oldest daughter? Quietly, I asked. Did you ever want to take care of me? The ensuing hush was deafening. From the back of my chair, I retrieved my handbag. I'm leaving, I declared. This was a mistake. Harper, please. Mom trailed me to the exit. Reflect on your actions. Consider your father's final request. I looked over at her. I won't support Lily, but I will assist Dad with his medical expenses if he requires them. That's my last response. Ignoring my sister's theatrical sobbing and my mother's calls, I went outside to my car. After a few blocks of driving away, I stopped and gave my aunt a call. I replied, "They want me to support Lily?" to her response. Can you believe that? Oh, Harper, she let out a sigh. I was worried it may be that kind of thing. Your parents have let your sister to work for so long, and she has never worked in her life. Anger-filled phone calls and texts filled the next 2 days. My phone was inundated with accusations and guilt trips from my mother and sister. You're killing your father with your selfishness, she wrote. When Lily wrote, you've always been jealous of me. You're just trying to punish me. I didn't reply, but I did preserve all the messages. I had a feeling I might require them in the future. I pressed the recording button on my phone before responding when Mom called again. Harper. She began right away. How come you're so aloof and self-centered? You're needed by your sister. I'm prepared to help Dad, I said coolly, but Lily is an adult. She must provide for herself. You're not worth your sister's little finger. Mom spit. We should never have called you. After hanging up, I sat in my office and gazed over the skyline of the city. I then proceeded to my mother's social media profile after opening my laptop. A lengthy post about her ruthless daughter's refusal to assist her dying father was there. Family members and friends expressed their surprise and unhappiness in me in the comments section. I felt something crack within of me. They wanted to play it this way after 12 years of silence. All right. I created my own article and included screenshots of the phone recording and the texts. I detailed everything, even the eviction, the pilfered education funds, and the favoritism throughout childhood. I concluded by telling them the truth about their recent communication, which was that they wanted me to provide for my able-bodied adult sister financially rather than that they wanted to get back together. The reaction was swift and tremendous. People expressed their disbelief, not at me this time, but at my parents in the stream of comments that followed. I received private messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, many of whom related how they had seen the partiality but had never spoken up. In the comments, Mom attempted to explain herself, but every justification only made her position worse. Not even her closest friends could defend asking one daughter to help out another adult who was more than capable. Aunt Rachel contacted me 6 months later to inform me that Dad had died. One more act of petty retaliation. Mom hadn't asked me to the funeral. In any case, I sent a big bunch of flowers along with a message that said, "Goodbye, Dad." 3 months have passed since then. I've been informed by Aunt Rachel that Mom is finding it difficult to support their way of life on the money that Dad left her. When Lily can't afford her typical restaurant dinners and shopping spree, she lashes out. I sometimes wonder if all of this has taught them anything. I received another call from an unidentified number last week. I left it on voicemail this time. It was Lily, requesting that I think again before assisting her until she is able to stand. I didn't reply and erased the note. I am content with my choices as I sit in my office and consider the life I have created for myself. I regret that I was never able to make a real reconciliation with Dad, but I'm not sad that I refused to back down. Some may accuse me of being aloof or unforgiving, but I've long since realized that setting and upholding appropriate boundaries does not equate to cruelty. I look at the picture of me with Uncle Mike and Aunt Rachel from my most recent birthday party that is on my desk. They are my true family. They have always supported me, believed in me, and loved me without conditions. As they say, blood may be thicker than water, but true love is stronger than blood and has no strings attached. Aunt Rachel texts me to inquire whether I'm still coming for Sunday dinner, and my phone buzzes. With a smile, I reply with a brief text, "Yes, wouldn't miss it." While some bridges get stronger with time, others remain burned for a reason. I now understand the distinction. Although my parents saved money for my sister, they forced me to take out loans and portrayed me as the bad guy. At the time, my sister Flora was 19 and I was 25. To our family, she was always like a tiny princess. A year ago, she was expected to graduate from high school, but regrettably, that did not occur. She chose to drop out on her own because of her extremely poor grades and admittance requirements, not because the high school dismissed her. She decided to pursue her one interest, music, last year by carrying on with the band activity she had begun with friends 2 years earlier. Although everything appeared to be going smoothly, we all felt that it was only a passing fantasy. Everyone believed that pursuing this desire at the expense of dropping out of high school was dangerous. However, since I work as a rock star full-time, I didn't think it was my place to point the finger at her, so I remained silent. I also believed that Flora would not want me interfering in her affairs. Paradoxically, the very individuals who ought to have cautioned her against making such a hasty decision urged her to drop out of high school and play music with her band. Her singing skills were only hobby level at best. To be honest, it's difficult to understand why she was a member of the band, even though the other members were somewhat talented. She and the other 5 band members left high school to focus on their music within 6 months. However, Flora was then kicked out of the organization. The explanation was straightforward. The band members had discovered a far better singer who was also capable of penning creative songs. With her degree in hand and no prospects for the future, she went back to her hometown and tried to start her own band. But nobody was interested. None of her acquaintances were musicians, after all, and none of them were foolish enough to abandon their own lives and aspirations in order to comply with her demands. She didn't get a job after being expelled from the band, and she still depends on our parents for financial assistance. That our parents could tolerate this is odd. Given the significant hurdles she has had, it appears that they believe she should take a temporary hiatus. But I think this is just the outcome of her own decisions. I have no empathy or sympathy for her. She ought to have evaluated her singing skills fairly. Furthermore, she didn't have a particularly strong bond with the band she played in high school since, as is only logical, the other members were already good friends before she arrived. Furthermore, it seems unjust that she is still living at home unburdened. She is obviously receiving financial help from our parents, even though she is a fully grown adult. I think this is especially unjust because right after high school, I was told it was time for me to be self-sufficient. I also had to figure out how I was going to pay for college on my own. I was aware that Flora's parents had allowed her to attend high school without even requiring her to pay tuition. I thus didn't anticipate receiving special care from the start. But I can't help but feel let down by the way she is being handled now. I knew early on that my parents had a favorite, and since it wasn't me, I made the decision to take out student loans and be ready to work in order to pay for my own high school education. But my sense of injustice increased when I found out that Flora had left high school and was still living at our parents' house without having to work since they were still providing for her. She never did anything but make reasons to avoid going to work. However, I saw a glaring discrepancy given how forgiving my parents were of her while being severe with me. I eventually approached my parents about these sentiments since I was so frustrated. My parents and I frequently disagreed on this issue, but they constantly attempted to force their opinions on me by playing on my feelings. It was therefore quite tough to decide to break up relations with them. However, an incident that my parents produced about a week ago made it obvious that I needed a break, and I ultimately decided to end our relationship. I invited my parents last week to come to my wedding, which is set for a few months from now. They can easily get to the location, which is only a 2-hour trip from my house. However, they started expressing reluctance to take part, citing work-related justifications. This baffled me because it should be quite possible to take a day off work to attend a daughter's wedding. I brought this up, and it resulted in a fight. They eventually disclosed the true reason for their rejection, which was that they had organized a celebration for my sister. By coincidence, Flora's high school graduation day fell on the same day as my wedding. She had been despondent lately and had dropped out of high school 8 months prior. My parents decided to plan a celebration for Mom before of my wedding in order to console her. To cheer her up, they organized a party, but they hadn't told her about it yet. I thus thought they would cancel their arrangements and come to my wedding. I thought this was the sensible course of action, but they continued, "We hope you understand why we cannot attend your wedding and why we need to dedicate that day to Flora." Their seriousness about missing my wedding, especially for an adult-only gathering, astounded me. Flora must confront the repercussions of her decisions. I felt emotional on the phone since I was already upset about our relationship and couldn't take my parents' criticism. I accused my parents of ignoring me and always putting Flora first. I also made the point that they were continuing to deny her possibilities for development by spoiling her without giving her future any real thought. I felt cut off from my parents as a result, and I told them I would never trust them again. I stated, "Your approach shows that you have failed in fulfilling your responsibilities as parents." However, they dismissed me without expressing regret, stating, "It's your wedding. You're just being too emotional." Since it was obvious that Flora needed my parents' assistance, I even believed that I wouldn't mind if they weren't present. I hung up the phone and called my grandparents, requesting that my grandfather accompany me to my wedding, as I didn't see the need in continuing the conversation. My father grandparents and I are really close. However, my maternal grandparents are out of state and a little far away. When I was unable to rely on my parents for support, they once assisted me by serving as guarantors for my college loans. Their assistance was quite comforting. My grandparents had always sympathized with my situation and recognized the tense relationship between me and my parents, as well as the unfair treatment of Flora and me. They have frequently attempted to counsel my father that his treatment of his children was unfair and harmful, but it appears that my parents have never found it appealing. More than anything else, I was grateful that my grandparents stood up for me. So, if my parents weren't going to the wedding, it was only logical for me to want them to. I contacted my grandparents and told them the truth about the whole thing. I started to become emotional while I was speaking and finally started weeping. My grandparents started apologizing for the disappointment my parents' actions had caused me, as if they could sense how wounded I was. Even though I kept telling them, This is not your fault. My grandparents were obviously very upset about my predicament. They then pledged that they would undoubtedly go to the wedding. Not only that, but they had been attempting for years to persuade my parents of their responsibility for my misery. Even on the phone, it was obvious that my grandparents were furious. When I asked my grandparents what they were going to do, they simply said, "You'll understand in time," without giving me any specifics. So, until my grandfather informed me that evening, I had no idea what he planned to do. A phone call came in after 1:00 a.m. My father was calling, and as soon as I answered, he began to rant at me, saying, "You are self-centered and unreasonable," making a fuss about everything. He said that because I was unable to comprehend what had transpired, I was unable to understand what he meant by those statements. I urged my dad to calm down and tell me what was going on. He first denied that I was telling the truth and said that I was only being innocent. But after I contacted my grandparents, he'd eventually informed me a few hours later that they had left for their home. It didn't go well, but they had a straight talk. It seems that my grandparents referred to Flora as a foolish, slothful cow and my parents as the worst leeches. The remarks were a little harsh. But given that Flora dropped out of high school, I could somewhat appreciate my grandparents' position. Only with the help of my grandparents could my parents provide for her every month. My father, who occasionally used my grandfather's money, is far poorer than my grandfather, who runs his own private company. My grandfather must have been unable to stand it any longer, so he eventually made up his mind. It was utterly untrue when my father said that Flora was trying to get a job, but was unable to locate one that fit her requirements. Flora was usually relaxing at home or going out to drink with friends whenever I got home. So I knew for a fact that she wasn't genuinely searching for employment. She was not interested in obtaining a job or working. My father may have lied to my grandparents because he believed they wouldn't accept it, but my parents were aware of this and didn't see it as an issue. My grandparents apparently decided they could no longer put up with the situation after speaking with me. They must have known before I did that Flora was totally dependent on my parents, had no desire to find employment, and felt no obligation to do anything in particular. Living on the assistance of others did not bother her in the least, and she was content with it. Speaking with my grandparents, they acknowledged that Flora had no plans to find employment, but they considered it odd that she hadn't done so after over a year. Nevertheless, they claimed to have been providing monthly support for her to my parents. They did not want my parents to suffer because of her, because she is their grandchild. On the other hand, my father informed me over the phone that my grandparents had visited my parents' home, resolved the matter, and promised to no longer provide for my parents. He requested me to speak with my grandparents to settle the issue, claiming that I was to blame for making such a huge deal out of my parents' absence at the wedding. Later, I received word from my father that the grandparents would henceforth transfer money to me rather than to my parents. I hung up the phone with my father as soon as I heard this and contacted my grandparents to find out what was going on. My grandparents answered almost away, and when I questioned whether it was true that they would be sending money each month, they said it was and clarified that it was intended to make up for my previous struggles. According to them, I should be able to live comfortably after getting married because I had already struggled enough, and I was free to decide how I wanted to spend the money. They wanted to support me because they thought it was crucial to back the correct candidate. However, it appeared that Flora had also attempted to get in touch with me. The next morning, when I saw my phone full of missed calls and texts, I made the decision to delete all of their contacts because I felt strongly that I should avoid interacting with them. They only wanted to express their desire to have the current issue fixed. I was apparently viewed as irrational. They obviously need more assistance than I did, but I turned them their request. I wasn't going to apologize. My conviction that I was correct further strengthened when I spoke with my friends, since I have a really hard time holding onto anger or resentment. I immediately began to consider other options, but it took a while to understand that there is a distinct distinction between holding grudges and defending oneself. I can see now that my parents' affection for me was highly deliberate. However, that does not imply that I will behave in that manner. They might call on me anywhere, at any time if I do. I don't care about it anymore, even though they might desire it. Ultimately, I am happy that my grandparents and those who genuinely care about me will be there at the wedding, even though my parents might not be. I felt no remorse, and my parents stopped stepping on me when I received excellent advice and was satisfied that I was doing morally. For me, that was a successful outcome. I believe there is no turning back now that I have the guts to speak to people about my strained family relationships. I refuse to be trampled underfoot any longer. My parents later went to the wedding in accordance with what my grandparents had advised. But regrettably, it was a complete mess. We had lunch together at a nearby hotel. But while I was feeling extremely at ease at the moment, I had warned my parents in advance to steer clear of any discussions that would generate arguments or issues. I did not want to visit my parents. My parents started the conversation and brought up the subject as soon as we sat down, even though it didn't appear like they wanted to ruin the atmosphere. They expressed their sincere sorrow for their previous treatment of me and repeatedly apologized. Flora was even genuinely sorry. I could have given them another opportunity and accepted their tale. Before my grandparents could respond, though, I thanked them for their apologies, but thought that, considering the situation, they were incredibly fake, and I still didn't believe them. Unfortunately for me, my parents would not have recognized their errors if my grandparents had continued to support me. However, I believed that I might be able to forgive the past because they appeared to be genuinely thinking back on and reevaluating how they treated me. I believe I should accept their apologies since I was their child. My parents, however, used that as an excuse, claiming that they were always forgiving of my childhood misdeeds. I couldn't help but giggle since I thought the example was so odd and funny. They were drawing comparisons between the deliberate errors they made as adults that they would not own and the faults I made as a youngster. I informed them that they would eventually be the ones deceived, but I knew that this had no bearing on them because I had dealt with similar circumstances for a long time. In a public setting, I stated, "If you make me uncomfortable, I will immediately leave the place with my grandparents." We intend to respond sincerely over these years, they stated after accusing me of being callous, but I didn't trust them at all. At last, I got up and made an attempt to escape the area. I believed that I had finally reached the conclusion I had been seeking. In addition, I was rather pleased with myself. It was undoubtedly a pleasant day. It's been a few days since I had lunch with my folks following the wedding. Flora began writing about me on social media after I informed them that I planned to stop communicating. I spotted her posts on social media as I had neglected to block them. She was critiquing the way I handled our parents. Anyone who knows her would be able to determine from the post's content that she meant to cut me out of her life. That post struck me as really odd. I believe my parents did little for me, but they went above and beyond for Flora, so I can see why she felt that way. She also uploaded the majority of the material regarding the arguments with my grandparents on social media, portraying herself and my parents as victims. I'm making an effort to explain the issue, but others who know us are unsure of which side to support. We have no other option because we attended the same high school and have a lot of friends in common, even if I detest that this matter has come to light. Since I felt that everything was so unjust, I want to stop communicating with them going forward. We have been fighting every day for the past 3 days since Flora made a social media post. To be honest, I'm exhausted, but I was resolved to fight until she gave up, and I believe that was the right choice. It is totally false that she was commenting in support of our parents, saying they did the same things for me as they did for her. She was asserting that she lacked privilege and was unable to get over such obstacles. She found it quite difficult to give up her goals and resume a normal life. In addition, she was approached by one of her former partners, who informed her about the remarks made by the other members of the band. He said that they never stated their intention to continue with Flora, and that a girl who had previously sang with them before high school had relocated to New Zealand, so she was only filling in. Their opinions were always their own, but Flora ignored them and didn't care about them. Although she made the decision to leave high school on her own, it might be argued that it was a poor one. Maybe she did it because she wanted to portray herself as a victim, so she fabricated the tale and left out crucial details. Her and our parents' constant claims that she had taken out student loans to cover her high school tuition was the biggest falsehood. But that didn't work. Everyone is aware of the truth now, and I no longer intend to interact with my family. I'm sick of them lying. They've done it too often. My grandparents share this opinion and want to break off all contact with my parents and Flora. Although I am astonished and upset, I am happy that I can finally tell my parents the truth since that is what I wanted from them. As a result, I will no longer have to spend time with my parents, and I am eager to start living on my own.